Right. Wonderful. Good morning, Alan. Together with my colleagues at MZN, I'm always talking and finding people with whom we share some values. And one of them is certainly Alan. And he is very keen on redefining what success in business means. And that success doesn't just mean simply chasing the next quarterly profit target, but taking responsibility for the society in which that business operates. And a few weeks ago, I spent an evening reading a fascinating, little, small, but very powerful book here from Alan. And I'm really, really pleased that Alan has decided to join me here and have a little conversation about it. Good morning, Alan.
Good morning, Chris. Many thanks for making the time from yourself too. I'm looking forward to this. Excellent.
It should be good, Alan. Now, Alan, you're not just the author of this and the previous book, but you also got about 25 years of experience as a senior executive leadership in positions, including a partner of a Big Four audit firm, the director of a FTSE 100 energy group, and you were the CEO of a very multinational chemical engineering group. And as if that isn't enough, you thought, I have some time left. I also become a trustee for integrity action. And I'm really pleased to say that the proceeds of this book, which is I really recommend reading. It's a good read in the evening. And all the proceeds of this one book go to integrity action.
Correct, yes.
So thanks for making the time. You're clearly very busy. Now, I know you're not staging or a second career as a consultant, hunting your next gig. So why do you dedicate your time on on the mission to change the views on business? Why this book and why now?
The reason for that is that I think, in a phrase, I'm a capitalist with a social conscience, and I do believe that we should contribute to society. And so the purpose agenda, that's captured me, absolutely captured me. Right. And I think where we are now is that the case for why be purpose-driven and the what to do, that's now well established, it's mainstream. And so we're now moving to the why bother and how to do it well. Well, to date, most of the work done on the why and the what has been done by academics and think tanks, and they've done an incredible amount of invaluable work. But I believe there's been a gap, almost an absence, in terms of a practitioner's perspective on how to do it, a CEO's perspective on how to do it. And in looking at what we managed to deliver at Hamworthy Combustion Group, then I realized that we'd actually driven a purpose-defined business. And so what I tried to do, I tried to provide a codified best practice of a core business process model. And in that way, along with the details around it, I think it should help to contribute in terms of the question, well, we know we need to do it, but how do we do it? And the timing is just now. It's vital that we do it now.
Fantastic. And you come with a lot of executive experience. You've clearly read the research. That's what that comes out in your book as well. And in our previous conversations, I found that really inspiring. And you say in what we talked, and you say in the book that we need to not just redefine the purpose of a company, but the very nature of it. Why is that, and what does that really mean?
Well, I think we've got to briefly look at the context of the why and the what, because they're the main drivers. In simple terms, we're in a seismic shift because the Western liberal market model is under threat. The reasons for that is that in recent years, multilateralism is giving to nationalism. The rule of law is giving way to autocracy, populism leadership, Poland, Hungary, autocracy, populist leadership, Trump and Johnson. And absolutely pivotal, on the 29th of July this year, the world is now consuming more resources than the world has. And this is in a wider context. There's a wider context in that it's been recognized for a considerable period of time that there's a disconnect between business and society. This is because of the huge inequalities in terms of income, inequalities in health, inequalities in justice, inequalities in race and opportunity. Well, there's been a generational shift. There's been a generational shift from my generation of baby boomers where we're looking at maximizing shareholder value, the single stakeholder constituency, there's been a generational shift to the millennials and Generation Z, where they're looking into wider view of stakeholders, multiple stakeholders, and the role of business in society. And they see that measuring company performance solely in terms of financial metric is insufficient. So that brings us to the why. And the why, it's all now about questioning. What value is a company seeking to deliver? Why does it exist? What's its reason for being? Why does it contribute to society? And consequently, that leads to the recognition that purpose delivers a company's profits. Profits are a product of a company's purpose. Profits are a result of what a company does. So that's led to what we could call a paradigm shift. There's a paradigm shift from single multiple stakeholders to a paradigm shift from the primacy of shareholder value to the primacy of company's purpose. And a company's purpose is in terms of it provides goods that are good and services that serve. And instead of causing world problems, it should be finding solutions to world problems. And so that's the framework and context for us to move on to, well, what do we do? How do we do it to make this change happen?
That's fascinating. So I like the phrase goods that are good and service that actually serve society. Couple of quick follow-ons, if you might permit. You're using purpose as the vehicle of and the framework in which a company ought to redefine its reason for being, its how it should view and make decisions on its daily operations and the targets it should aim at. Now, corporations don't exist in isolation; they are owned by shareholders. And you say, we need to shift from the primacy of shareholders to the primacy of purpose. Are you basically just out to depower shareholders and slam at them and say, well, the profit delivery is not going to be what we do anymore? Or do you see that there's a joining of the two?
It's symbiotic.
Right.
For a sustainable long-term performance where a company is contributing to the good of society, it has to make profits.
Right.
If it doesn't make profits and it doesn't make a reasonable return, then it will go out of business. So how can it contribute to the goodness of society? It's not tautological.
That's very clear. Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's get a little bit concrete then. I think that's a very convincing argument. So let's tell me a little bit more how, on the how. So we've done the why and the what, but what are the three actions you see that business executives, decision makers such as yourself, really need to do to push the actual delivery of purpose on defined companies?
I think we have to recognize that businesses are not homogeneous.
Right.
I'd say that if we assume that there's a normal distribution curve, I think there's two sets of outliers. One outliers are the people that get it. They're believer companies. They're doing it. They get it. They know what to do. They're getting on with it. Prime example, all the casework from Unilever, it's all there to run. Then at the other end, there's the agnostics. They will never get it. Now, in between, and I think this could be the majority, and there's a lot of legislation coming through. In between, there are some of them that are green washers, ESG washers, purpose washers, and also businesses, many CEOs, they're satisficers. Yeah. Why go that extra mile? Go on. So we've got to look at that mid-range majority and say, how can we push the pendulum to move them along? And I think we need to push the pendulum to move them along in terms of three areas. One, we've got to have tighter, more precise regulation. Two, allied with that is doing integrated reporting that subsumes ESG. And thirdly, I would like to establish a purpose corporate index ranking so that we could name and shame. And if we have all of those three in place, then the CEOs would then be wanting to say, well, how do I actually do it? But we've got to be able to give them a push, a kick, so that they do it, so they start to address, how do I actually do it?
So let me translate this to non-finance people. I'm an accountant. You are very familiar with finances, and you were in charge of multi-million budgets. Some of the people listening to this might not be. a company needs to publish its financial statements, and there's a legal requirement to do this. Are you in effect saying, Alan, what we need to do in addition to the financial reporting is purpose reporting?
We've got to do non-financial reporting.
Yeah.
Let me give an example. In the UK, there's the Financial Reporting Council. And under the Financial Reporting Council, the legislation that was introduced a few years ago, companies now, premium listed companies in the UK, have to report not just on their finances, but also the extent to which they're delivering their purpose. And a review was done by the Financial Reporting Council of a sample of companies that were reporting, and it found that when looking at those companies, the majority of them weren't reporting tightly enough.
Yeah.
They were doing slogans, mission statements, marketing statements. And what the Financial Reporting Council was saying is that really they've got to be more precise in behavioural terms in terms of setting out initiatives with greater clarity, measurement of their performance, impact, details of steps taken, process and metrics, and how feedback is taken into account. Well, all of those are nice words, but let me try to demonstrate it with the company that I ran. The company, it was a chemical engineering multinational, Hamworthy Combustion Group. I was parachuted in by a private equity house to grow it for sale. What we did as a business, we did combustion burners. This is all about emissions reduction, greater fuel efficiency, absolute safety. To give a simple example, if you have a gas cooker at home, that's an immersion burner. If it backfires, it blows your house up, it kills you.
Pretty much,
yes. But when combustion burners work, which hopefully they always do, we supply to the downstream oil and gas sector, which is fairly noxious, and food processing. To give you an example, an ethylene plant that makes plastics, they cost between $1 to $2 billion. We'd put 1,000 to 2,000 burners on them. In the marine sector, there's liquefied natural gas carriers. They're 1 football pitch wide, 2 football pitches long. Exclusion zone at 2.5 miles. If the gas moves from being liquid to gas, it expands, it has to be vented, it can auto-ignite. We put a burner in the funnel. It was 90 megawatts. That's a mini power station.
Yes.
It generates enough electricity for a city double the size of Oxford. They cost about £500,000. Well, what we did, when I joined, it was fairly obvious that the company was, to be blunt, was a dog. It had declining profits in a growing market. It hadn't released new products in 10 years. There was little investment in R&D facilities, and its culture was highly dysfunctional. It was command and control, it was risk averse, it was hierarchical, little trust. It became a world leader. It was transformed. We were operating in 11 countries, and we finished with 23 offices in 19 countries. And the way that we did it, it was by leading and operating a company with what I call heightened integrity. And the starting point for that is the purpose of the company. Well, to borrow a phrase, we delivered a healthier environment as a guardian for the future generations. Well, that sounds, hold on, a chemical engineering metal bashing company delivering a healthier environment for future generations. Get real, what was it? Well, what we did do, we invested in R&D and we produced world-leading combustion burners. And that led to lower emissions, greater fuel efficiency, absolute safety. In doing that, we gave technical solutions for reducing the adverse environmental impact from the Oxford's downstream oil and gas. That in turn led to cleaner air, reduced depletion of resources, fewer polluting disasters. Now that sounds a little complicated. How did it resonate? I'll give you a very simple example. Every year we had a competition for our employees' children to design a new health and safety poster. In about year 3, year 4, one poster came, and at the bottom there was some grass painted green and a sky blue and a factory. And there was, in black it said, "We clean the air." That was resonance from the child of one of our employees. But how did we do that? Well, there's a number of actions that have got to be taken. The first and the prime action is that the CEO sets the tone. the CEO has to demonstrate and be seen to demonstrate the right tone from the start, from the top. And it's how things are done around here. Mm-hmm. Again, let me give you some examples. In my first 3 months, a colleague came to me and said, oh, you should be meeting so-and-so, the CEO of a competitor company, to discuss market prospects. Well, sorry, discussing market prospects is price fixing. That's illegal. I didn't do it. Now, the impact on colleagues would be, well, okay, you didn't do it. But one would expect a CEO not to do illegal matters. So the impact is low. But if we're operating with heightened integrity, then we have to respond to issues before they actually become issues and anticipate them. Again, another example. We invested heavily in a training center because we'd grown fast and we needed to do the training. Because it's highly technical, we had very clearly defined technical training manuals. And then we took a number of our senior staff who volunteered to become trainers. We trained them as trainers. And they did the training in addition to their day job. We hired a technical training manager to run all of this. Yeah. The results in terms of satisfaction was brilliant. But he was hierarchical. He was command and control. He'd ping emails. You were doing this training at this time for when? And these were volunteers. And lo and behold, they didn't feel like doing it.
Right.
And so over time, we counseled him. Our HR director, she was brilliant. She had words with him. His line director had words. I deliberately bumped into him and said, how's it going? He said, oh, the results are brilliant, but people are reluctant to do the training. And what that means is his values didn't coincide with our values. His competence was super, but you've got to be value-led and then competence. The other aspect, just two other examples of CEO leading is that at times there's going to be decisions where there's a trade-off between purpose and profit. An example, our Italian company wanted to source from our US company for a contract in Iran. At that time, US companies couldn't sell in Iran. Well, that was great for us because it was a highly profitable market. But we looked at the legislation and it would not be illegal for our Italian company to source from the US into Iran. But we looked closer and there was legislation coming through that in the future it would be illegal. We took the decision not to avoid future legislation. We could have done it.
And do it
then that cost us profits. In year 3 or 4, when we've been having a degree of success, our private equity owners said, come on, we want you to push for a 20% growth in profits. And we said, well, you know, and they pushed. And I said, well, if you own the business, if you want a 20% growth in profits as a budget, you can have it. But it'll be your budget, it won't be ours. Mm-hmm. Because if we have that budget, we won't be able to recruit the staff that will need to do all the service work to make sure our customers' installations are operating with greater fuel efficiency, lower emissions. And so that's again where the CEO has to be seen to be demonstrating the right tone from the top, even if it's at the possible cost of money.
I'm interested in this angle because it's very well to share great inspirational leadership experiences in hindsight. And it's a lot harder when you're in the moment. So you're in a situation where you're joining that company. As you said, it was a dog. It is, declining profits in a growing market. It is not doing well. You're joining in as the new commander-in-chief. The owners, the private equity people, didn't sound particularly happy. They wanted to push more. And you start a conversation about safeguarding future generations, sacrificing profit for purpose, and not taking advantage of revenue and profit-making opportunities, which at the time were still legal, even though you knew in 2 or 3 years' time this might be outlawed. That you sit there in the pressure. I imagine I'm familiar with the pressure environment that someone can be in. After all, the private equity owners can hold a CEO's feet to the fire. What sort of personal things have gone through your mind? How much risk did you need to take charge of your own reputation? How much did you ever doubt that that you're doing the right thing? And if you doubted, how did you push through the internal resistance in your own management and your owners to get this thing done?
Well, it was very simple, really. It was such a mess that no, it's serious. The main challenge I had was that I was parachuted in and I wasn't an engineer. And so in terms of credibility with everybody else, with my colleagues, it was very difficult. And so it was a case of trying to grab low-hanging fruit and to be demonstrating value to the team. With the private equity house, I used to meet them at their office once a month, and we would have our board meetings once a month and no surprises. And we had a bit of luck and they were looking closely. It was low-hanging fruit. And the breakthrough came in, I think, month 4, in that we were looking to try to invest in a new facility. And I wanted to test the private equity house, because if they weren't prepared to invest in this business, how would we grow it?
Right.
And so we produced an investment case, and my colleagues did the technical part, but I put the investment case together.
Right.
And the chairman knew that I'd personally put this investment case together. And so I went through the numbers before the board meeting with him, and he didn't say anything, and his colleague, and we put it through, and then we had a special board meeting, and they kicked the tires on it. My colleagues contributed technically, and this went on for, we went on for 2 hours. Mm-hmm. They kicked it. And at the end of the 2 hours, they approved it. And the chairman said, "What do we do next?" So I said, "Well, you signed these minutes that it's been approved." I had the minutes ready.
So you were, okay, but I think there's more than to being well prepared here. And
no, well, it wasn't well prepared. It was testing the private equity house. Were they prepared to invest in this business, yes or no?
Yes.
Because if they weren't prepared to invest it, how could I turn it round? Equally, by getting that investment case with my colleagues, where I'd personally written it, that showed up, and no investment case had been approved for 10 years. Right. That gave me credibility to my technical colleagues. Equally, on the site, and it was a large site, this was going to be a major fabrication. Our people would see it. It would send a message to, at that time, I think we had, yes, we're in 11 countries. It would send a message throughout the whole group. Hold on, we're investing in this R&D for that sector so as to get a world-beating burner.
Right. And you've done that. I understand you basically convinced the investors to charge ahead with the business rather than save yourself back to health or do another course. What did it feel like, and the final question on this personal thing, what did it feel like to arrive, to be parachuted in, as you say, and start conversations about the general purpose of the organization when you were not an engineer, you were the outsider? I mean, you're basically an accountant who joined in.
I didn't start a conversation about purpose. We never had a launch program. We never had it as a project or program. It worked its way through.
Right.
We only came up with a statement of values in year 3.
Okay, so it wasn't the first thing that you pushed out. It wasn't.
No. Well, in certain respects, yes. As I said, it's about leading with integrity. Mm-hmm. And so I held all of my meetings outside my office. It was a large site, so that way I could walk round, and that way I would bump into people. Mm-hmm. In the first, to give an example again, in month 3, we had an international conference. At that international conference, the top 70 people were there, and I presented, we were going to be world leaders. We had this vision. We were going to grow profits. We're going to double the size of the business, grow profits faster than revenue. And I asked the questions, no questions. Nobody would speak. Later that evening, chatting to one of the colleagues who was quite brave, I said, there were no questions. I said, why? He said, well, the last time we had this 6 years ago, somebody asked a question, he didn't have a job the next day.
Wow, okay.
Another example of how we changed the culture. Our US operation was loss-making. and it accounted for quite a lot of the decline in our business. The guy that used to lead our US operation had left the company 6 months before. So in the first 2 weeks, I had to go over to see our US operation. Mm-hmm. Before going, I managed to track that former country manager and ask him, what's the business like? He said, it's a mess. I said, is there anybody there that can run it? He said, no. I went over with my chairman who was watching, he wanted to see how I operated.
Yeah, sure.
We went to our operation in the States. It had a more small factory facility. We met everybody. There were two senior people, Larry and Tony. And so I said, at the end of the day, I said, will you join us for dinner this evening? When we got back to the hotel, my chairman said, what are we going to do? So I said, we've got a choice. We can do a fire sale, close it down, or give those guys the opportunity.
To turn it around. To
turn it around. I want to give those guys the opportunity, because if we come out of the States now, we'll never get back in, and that'll affect the sale price of the company for you in several years' time.
Sure.
Larry and Tony turned up for dinner. I said, before dinner started, I said, look, you're the president, you're the vice president of our US operations. I want you to draw up a business plan, and I'll come back in 2 weeks' time to review the business plan with you. They said, well, what are the targets in the business plan? So I said, the target is straightforward. I want you to draw up a business plan of a company that you're going to be proud of. But what do you mean to be proud of? So it's up to you. You do the business plan. I went back 2 weeks later. They had a business plan. It was okay. But in it, what they'd done, they were making some redundancies and employing. So I said, what's this? They said, well, we need people that fit the market. We haven't been allowed to do this before. So I said, okay, it's approved. Oh, right, is that it? So I said, yes. I said, except we've got this international conference coming up in 3 months' time. I want you to present it at the conference. Well, why us? Well, it's your business plan. Again, that sent, they were empowered. They were given the responsibility. They were given the authority. They were given the freedom. And that business turned out to be incredibly profitable with very few difficulties in ensuing years. And at the international conference, that went round and people were chatting. And so it was liberating, it was empowering.
That's it. And that, again, by just empowering them and by providing the backing of it. I want to, Alan, I love hearing how you've done this in a relatively short amount of time by not saving it to death, not retracting, and not focusing solely on profit, but leading with purpose. You've mentioned earlier, and I want to get back to this, about away from the individual company, how we get this integrated business reporting done. You've sort of mentioned it earlier on by likening it to the UK Finance Conduct Authority, or for example. Now, you've shared a slide with me. Let me just show it. And you've came up with metrics on integrated business reporting. Can you just tell me a little bit about what do you mean with that, and how does that help? Let me just show the slide right now. How does that help get a business towards its purpose? Do you see that now?
Yeah. Well, if we say that the purpose of Hammerworthy combustion was to deliver, to protect the environment and to deliver long-term sustainable growth, integrated business reporting goes beyond financial. What it does, it provides a relationship with other stakeholders. Mm-hmm. And so here we're being quite explicit. Did we protect the environment? Did we with natural capital? And the answer is yes, because we did produce reduced emissions, fuel efficiency, greater safety. And in terms of our intellectual capital, well, in the power sector, in the US, the government called ours the latest best technology. In the process sector, a European client who was on the international conference circuit called it the best burner in the world. Right. I mentioned LNG burners. We had an 85% market share. All of those reflect our intangibles, our R&D. All of those led to our brand and our reputation. In terms of human capital, there's some metrics here. In year 2, our staff turnover was higher than the UK engineering average. By year 5, we'd reduced it by 60%. It was now a third of the UK average.
What we also, right?
But what we also did, we went beyond that. And there it was reducing mismanagement and maladministration. And then in terms of social capital, this is stronger governance, regular traction, there with other stakeholders. And then this financial capital, well, our private equity owners, CAG EBITDA 18%, where our revenue is 12% in a market growing by 7%, high cash conversion, premium save line. But we've got to go further than this. We've got to go further than this in terms of when we look at natural capital, what we've also got to be looking at is what's the net impact? Because it's far too easy to say, well, we consume so much energy, we've reduced it. But we've got to look at it in totality. How much energy did we consume, both in developing the burners and how much energy is consumed subsequently by clients using them? And then we've got to go further, go throughout the whole supply chain. What's the net impact of the steel that we've used in terms of society?
Yeah.
And in terms of looking at our people, okay, great lower staff turnover, that's straight into the bottom line and good. But are we looking after the well-being of our people? And in terms of that, in our suggestion scheme, somebody suggested, why not a 4.5-day week with the same hours? We said, yes, 2.5-day weekend. Our people, we traveled all over the world in difficult circumstances. So we had on call a very senior, experienced nurse. So if somebody was off ill, the nurse went to see them. Also, in terms of how you treat your people, you got to treat them as a someone, not as somebody or as something. Mm-hmm. And again, when something exceptionally goes wrong in a person's private life that's nothing to do with work, how do you help? To give you some 3 examples, one of our staff, the female in finance, suddenly diagnosed with cancer, and the prognosis, she would die in 6 weeks.
Goodness me.
Her mother lived 200 miles away, who was infirm. We hired a private ambulance. Another example, a colleague who worked in the factory doing heavy lifting, he had a heart attack at work. He went into intensive care. He survived, he prospered, but we found out he had a weak heart. It wasn't due to his work. It so happened his wife worked for us. Our HR director who said he's brilliant. She made sure how were things going. His wife said, well, we're getting quite worried about him coming back to work because we've got a mortgage, our daughter going to university, he won't have the same job. She was told he will have the same salary irrespective of the job. Another colleague had motor neuron disease. He could only work a 3-day week. He was kept on the same salary. It went worse. We said, come into the office when you want to, because that gave him some purpose in life. Mm-hmm. He stayed on the same salary. They were exceptional circumstances. But the pivotal point there, I didn't make those decisions. Colleagues made them. And so that was leading and operating with heightened integrity on the front foot. And that's how you drive change in a business.
I mean, your numbers, that's really impressive, Alan. I think at the times of COVID, at the times when, with my colleagues around MZ and around the world, I certainly seen how being kind, being human, being compassionate, and just being a mate, basically, to the people you work with, is not just the right thing to do, but also an extremely beneficial thing to do for the business. I mean, you clearly produced the numbers. You clearly showcase here in your experience, what I find so interesting also in your book, that the consequence of acting with heightened integrity and the business results that traditional businesses are after, that consequence comes in within a month of change of acting. It's not a complicated relationship. Is that right?
It takes several years.
Well,
because what you've got, it's got to pervade the whole business. And for it to pervade the whole business, the CEO has to set and demonstrate the tone. But the key leaders here are those at the middle management, because they're the ones that have interface on the daily actions and decisions that deliver the company. For strategic implementation, it's very rare that there's a big bang solution, a silver bullet. It's the same with purpose. It's the daily repetition of actions and decisions that matter. And for that, you've got to have the middle level leaders believing and wanting to do it. And so that's the CEO's audience as well as all the staff, because you've got to get it all the way through the supply chain. You've got to get it. It's like having the finance function has to run all the way through the business.
Right. Why
So
would
does
it be
the purpose function?
perfect? Yeah, that's well put. Thank you so much for that. So back on your concrete things, the final two questions. Your integrated business reporting, which we've just shown, which is also in the book, which I referred to a couple of times right now, that gets us the data. That gets us the ideas. Now, you've also put down some best practice metrics in how to go a little bit further and in what metrics should a leader with heightened integrity actually drive by. I'm going to show them here. And I'd love if you could just talk around that a little bit and let us know what that actually means to you and how that helped you in your position. Let me just share the slide. Here, you recognize them?
Yeah, the source of these are twofold. The non-financial behavioral from a think tank called Blueprint for Better Business. The financial operational impact, they're from a think tank called the Big Innovation Center. Both of these have been based on comprehensive and systematic literature reviews. What these are the characteristics that one would expect from a purpose-defined business. Now, I've gone through to an extent being a responsible and responsive employer in terms of staff turnover, what we did for them, and what have you. If we look at being honest and fair with customers and suppliers, these are the behaviors. Well, how did we see that? Well, in year 2, we retained a specialist firm called AMR that did customer satisfaction surveys worldwide. Mm-hmm. They did a survey of, I think, 90 of our customer suppliers, and the results were awful. Absolutely awful in terms of dissatisfaction, quality issues. How did we address that? By year 5, and by year 5, we were now in 19 countries, 11. The average size of our contracts had doubled. They did the same survey. They did not find one issue or one dissatisfaction. They just did. They said if they hadn't done it, that they wouldn't believe it. Now, how do we do that in terms of
what was the difference there?
Sorry?
Yes, what changed in between those two surveys?
Well, what changed between the two surveys, it's a host of small things, but one of the biggest things that we did, we established something we called the knowledge bank, because in any organization, data and information is power, and it's a hierarchy. If you can give everybody access to the same data information, what you're doing, you're getting people engaged, you're getting them empowered. They can take decision making. Well, we produced this thing called the Knowledge Bank. It was a virtual private network. On it, we had about 90% of the totality of the company's information.
Right.
And by the totality, it was, I forget the numbers, 200,000 sets of engineering drawings, data on 40,000 different contracts, data on 9,000 installations. We outsourced 80% of what we did. There was a host of manuals. We had all the cost sheets for all of our products. We had all the R&D results for all of our products. Every member of the group was 2 clicks away. To give you an example.
And everybody could access this? Absolutely.
Yes. Yes. I went to our office in Sao Paulo in Brazil, and we went to see a client in the process sector about 90 kilometers outside Brazil. I went with Cesar, our country manager. We were there, it was at the end of the contract, everything was going well, just ready to go for lunch. And a manager came in on the site, said, sorry, we have a problem. On your kit, there are 5 wires and 4 holes. Well, our country manager, Cesar, we went out, he looked at it, he opened his PC, 2 clicks, he was in. He pulled up the engineering drawing. Out of the engineering drawing, he clicked into it. He pulled up the 3D CAD drawing, clicked into it, rotated it, pulled the part out. The part had 5 wires and 5 holes. So he went into it again. He pulled up the client's order. They transposed 2 numbers. Yes. They'd ordered the wrong part. He sent an email back to the UK. Can you get this out in a hurry? Now, he solved the customer's issue there and then. Ordinarily, without this knowledge bank, it would be an iteration of emails going back into photographs, diagrams, whatnot. He was empowered, he was engaged, he got fulfillment, he got self-worth, he had purpose to his job.
And so a problem that could cause a lot of dissatisfaction, and that is obviously not very good for the customer, got solved by,
it got solved in real time.
Yes, right there and then.
There and then. And we've gone through, I've gone through the financial recruit, retention, and we've gone through that. Larger firm size, smaller regulatory fines. And so what these can be used by shareholders to hold the feet of this, a board can use these to their CEO. How are you delivering on our purpose? Give me evidence of these behaviorals. And it's those behavioral things that the Financial Reporting Council wants to see. What processes, what behaviors. What they also want to see, what's the impact? And the impact, again, a board wants to see that. Shareholders can say that, can say, well, show me what you're doing. Well, how are you performing on all of these? And many of them are non-financial. They're operational, they're behavioral.
But you're demonstrating here what I quite like, and what makes this book you've written so pragmatic is non-financial reporting is often held to be quite qualitative, quite individually. And you said, no, it's not. There are clear metrics we can measure. And if we measure them over time, we see the direction of travel. And that translates itself into not just happier customers, better fulfilled staff, less turnover, yes, a solid profit, but also the company as a corporate citizen in the world.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's doing goods that are good, services that serve. It's solving world problems rather than creating world problems.
Right.
And the thing is, we're individuals. If you've got a choice of going to work with rounded shoulders or going to work with pride, what's going to happen to productivity?
Right. No,
also,
clear.
If staff can't make decisions, well, if you're employing people where you don't make decisions, they're not going to add value.
It's very true.
But an important but, you've got to accept that when people make decisions, they will make a wrong one. So what? Sort it out, but don't make the wrong decisions twice.
Yes, very true. I want to ask one more question, and that sort of encapsulates everything we've just talked about for the last half an hour. There is a nagging feeling in society with younger generations, in the political discourse, and frankly with many CEOs and business decision makers as well, who do the purpose washing you've mentioned initially, who talk a good game, but ultimately when push comes to shove, many, not all, many are prioritizing and going for short-term profit increase over which externalizes risks, externalizes societal or environmental harm, breaks or continues towards breaking a planetary boundary, just to produce the next half year or the next annual profit target. After all, the stock market incentivizes it, and many venture capitalists, many shareholders are looking for that almost exclusively. As a sort of message from your experience, 25 years plus, what would you say to them?
I do what Paul Polman did, scrap quarter reporting.
Right.
And I was a director in a FTSE 100 NYSE listed company. And in week 3 of the quarter, we started preparing the quarterly report.
And that's ridiculous, isn't it?
Absolutely stupid. And then again, who wants shareholders that are going to be fickle quarterly?
Right.
Because, if you're doing integrated business reporting, and if you're doing it against a company's purpose, you're getting a lot of soft and hard indicators in terms of what's happening in the business. Yeah. And the beauty is, on integrated business reporting, you can fold in the ESG metrics.
Yeah.
They fit into it wonderfully, and they fit into it against a company's purpose. And there's going to be, in the next few years, an incredible amount of green and ESG washing. I'll give you some simple examples. In the UK, A lot of the supermarkets report how they've saved plastic bags, big tip, reduced their energy consumption, big tip. But are they doing goods and services that serve? I challenge them, because a lot of their own product foods have excess sugar, excess salt. What's two of the biggest diseases in Western countries? Obesity, diabetes. Now, if they had a clearly defined purpose, surely part of their purpose would be the well-being of their customers.
Yes.
They're not looking after the well-being of their customers. If they had purpose-based, if they had a purpose-defined company, if they had integrated reporting, then the well-being of the customers, that would have some impact in terms of the amount of salt and sugar.
Sure.
And so I got great, and they all interlink a purpose-defined company, integrated reporting, and ESG. They can all fold together. And there's so much evidence that companies that are defined in purpose actually outperform their peers over a number of years. There'll be some exceptional cases. And so it's a source of competitive advantage. Acting
with integrity is a source of competitive advantage. Those who don't, final question, you actually, you call for this heightened integrity reporting, you defined the metrics, you pulled them together, you've linked it to your experience. I find that fascinating. You actually go a little bit further, don't you? You want to go out and do some naming and shaming, and you said to the other day, you want to publish a ranking of companies by delivery on their purpose. Can you just tell me a little bit about this? Are we going out to name and shame those who don't?
Yes. What would be one? The reason for that is very straightforward, because it's in their own interest. We've got to ask, why is it now that the millennials and Generation Z are having a voice? And the reason they're having a voice is that there's been an intergenerational shift in terms of the basis of company investment valuation.
Yeah.
If we go back to the 1970s, on the S&P 500, intangibles accounted for less than 20%.
Yes.
If we go to 2020, it's over 80%. Now, intangibles are the source of competitive advantage on networks, digitization, R&D, patent, brand, reputation. What's the source of that? People. And so with that, if there's a name and shame list, then the employees, again, survey evidence shows very clearly that millennials and Generation Z will typically change their job within 5 years. And that's about 27% would not stay beyond 5 years.
Yes.
But if they identified with the purpose of their company, then over 80% would stay for more than 5 years. I was asked to meet a financial institution in the UK, and I was going through saying, well, if you follow a purpose agenda, you'll make greater profits. He was blank.
Yes.
But when I pushed your staff turnover will reduce, he was awake, because he knew that the only asset he had, the only source of value, were his people. And so by drawing up a ranking, like Transparency International does it for countries, we could do it for companies. Then that name and shame in the market would hit their brand reputation, their people. To give another example of hitting this, Google several years ago was doing a special site for China that was SIPT.
So true,
The people didn't like that. They sent a letter to Google headquarters. Nothing happened. Then they went out on the streets, coordinated worldwide, hit publicity. What did Google do? They stopped doing that site in China.
Right.
Brand and reputation impacts, whether a company is purpose-driven, that impacts their people, the millennials, Generation Z.
And they've done that at the cost of a huge market, but to the benefit of their integrity and to the benefit of the rest of the business.
And to make sure the rest of the business stays on.
Right, absolutely true. So there's also another thing you could say. If you continue, would one of your conclusions be, if you continue acting with a short-term vision and purely down to financial metrics, not the wider integrity metrics that you proposed and pulled together here, then ultimately you go bust, you go out of business anyway.
There will always be exceptionals that go against the general rule.
Sure.
And as I said, when I said the distribution curve, some of believers doing it, there will be agnostics. And in some of those agnostics, there will be some very, very successful people.
Fantastic.
But there will be a minority.
Fantastic talking to you. I think your plan makes sense. You got the experience. That this book that I can really recommend is a worthwhile read. It's not a big read in which there lies a lot of power. And I really like the fact that you don't beat around the bush, but simply say how it is, rooted in your experience. As a decision maker, a business leader who wants to get inspiration from this, is there any final sort of advice or thoughts, or just a statement that you would like to send them on their way into the office with?
Have fun as well.
Fun is massively underrated, isn't it?
Have fun and try to enjoy.
Fantastic. Alan, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for talking to me. I really thought this is an excellent take on how we change a business to become a force for good, and an organization that makes the world better, not despite being in the world, but because it is in the world. Thank
you very much indeed for inviting me, Chris. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye-bye.